The boardroom, the field, the leadership table. To most, it's just the office. To me, it's the arena. Welcome to In the Arena with Stephanie, the briefing room for high-achieving Christian women navigating the complexities of male-dominated industries. I'm your host, Stephanie Brown, CEO of Her Authenticity, leadership coach, and master Christian life coach. You aren't in these spaces by accident. You are there on assignment. I believe that when you lead with biblical excellence, success is the inevitable overflow. Through this podcast, we're reclaiming your kingdom authority and expanding your corporate influence, equipping you to lead as the authentic ambassador you were created to be. Let's step into the arena. Welcome back to In the Arena with Stephanie. I'm glad that you are here. So we only have a few more episodes in our first season, and I want to say thank you for joining and for supporting. We've spent this first season talking about identity, talking about who you are, and also how you walk into the room. We talked a little bit also about what it means to be an ambassador. So at this point, you should know a little bit more about who you are and what it means to be an ambassador of Christ in your arena. But let's be honest. If you would just think back a little bit, there are some real moments when you're still defaulting back. And what do I mean by that? I mean you're defaulting back to overthinking about things and holding on to your thoughts, or maybe even adjusting your voice depending on the scenario that you're in or the room that you're in. And so today, I want to talk about the identity gap, which is basically the gap between what you know and what you do. That gap between who you know that you are and between what you actually do. So let's dive in. Knowing who you are sometimes is an issue because sometimes we don't fully understand and know who we are. But I believe that, and I hope that through these podcasts that you've done the work and now you understand more about who God has created you to be. And so the challenge of knowing who you are is not the big issue in your life. The challenge is that your behaviors haven't caught up to your identity, right? That's the gap that we're talking about. And if you don't address that gap, you will stay in a cycle where you understand truth, but you don't consistently live it. And we see that gap not only in the arena, but a lot of times we also see it in our lives, in our everyday lives that we live out. We know the truth. We know what we should be doing. We know who we are, but we don't consistently live it. You know, there is a difference between knowing something and embodying it. You can say, I am an ambassador of Christ. You can agree with it. You can even feel it when I say it and you're listening to this podcast. But then when you get into a meeting or you get challenged or someone begins to question your thinking and question your identity, and that moment, your response doesn't come from what you know or what you learned and experienced, but it comes from what you've practiced. It comes from those habits that you have repeatedly done. Because under pressure, you don't exemplify your true identity. You fall back into your habits that you have repeated over and over again. And many of these habits and these patterns, they're hard to break because they were built over a period of time and they were built in environments where you had to prove yourself. They were built in environments where you were protecting yourself and you had to be careful. It's where you had to read people before you would even speak. And so now those habits and those patterns that you've learned, they have to be unlearned. Because now, knowing who you are, understanding your identity, you can't continue in those same habits because the alignment of the two are off. I often think about this when I think about the Israelites. And the book of Exodus, they had been delivered from Egypt. They were no longer slaves. They were no longer living in that bondage. In a sense, their identity had changed. They went from being slaves of Egypt to God's people who had been delivered. And so here they are, free, delivered, non slaves. Moses is up in the mountain talking with God. And as time passed, some uncertainty came into where they were, some pressure, if you please. And instead of them standing and who they were as God's people who had been delivered from Pharaoh in Egypt, what did they do? They went to Aaron and they asked him to create something that they could worship. Now they had God, they could worship God, but they asked Aaron to create for them basically a God that they could worship. And we know the story. He built them a golden calf. Now, again, it wasn't because these people didn't know who they were, but it was because they were in a situation where there was uncertainty and they felt under pressure. And what did they do? They went back to what was familiar to them. They went back to old habits. They went back to their past, the past that was behind them. But they defaulted to those old patterns and those old habits, and that identity gap remained. So you must embrace the ambassador shift. See, an ambassador walks into every room grounded in who she is. She pays attention to what's going on in the room, but she also stays steady in who she is herself. She is consistent in showing up in a way that reflects who she is. So here's what I want you to understand. There is intention behind where you are. There's a purpose. There's a reason that you are there. There is a reason why you're in the industry that you're in, why you're in the company that you're a part of. Even there's a reason why you are surrounded by the people who are in your department, in your arena. God has placed you there. He's placed you there to be his ambassador, to be his voice, to contribute, to influence, to represent. And your representation requires that you be consistent. Because if your identity continues to shift, and it shifts every time you're in a different arena or a different situation or room, then you can't fully carry the assignment or representation that you were called to. So you must be consistent and you must close that gap between who you know you are and how you show up and what you do. You have the confidence that you need to do this. You have the motivation. You're reminded of who you are when you're reading God's word, when you're hearing those sermons on Sundays and the different times that you are together. But the gap between that knowledge and those actions must be closed. So let's close the gap. Here's a few things that you can do. Number one, catch the moment. You have to become aware of when the shift is happening. What is triggering you to adjust between who you are and what you're doing? Is it when you feel like someone is challenging you, or when a certain person is speaking? Do you feel it when maybe you feel like you still have to prove something? Maybe you're afraid. Pay attention to what is happening and that moment when you find yourself shifting or doing something that is not truly who you are. Because it's that moment, is identifying that moment, that's what you need to work on. Second, I want you to call it what it is. When you find that moment, call it what it is. Now, I'm not saying be emotional and dramatic, but when you notice it, just clearly identify what it is. You can say to yourself, hey, this is not who I am. This is a habit. This is a pattern. And I'm going to break this pattern. I'm going to break this habit. I'm going to operate in who I am, even if I'm a little nervous about it, even if it makes me uncomfortable. And number three, I want you to correct it in real time. Don't wait till later. Don't wait until the meeting's over and then replay it, but adjust in that moment. When you feel yourself shifting, when you feel yourself maybe over explaining or holding, your posture because you're trying to hold back, make those small corrections and let your true identity shine through. Because when you do that consistently, then you're going to close that gap. So here's what I want you to do this week. Here's something that you can do to go a little deeper. I want you to look at your current role differently this week. Identify 3 kingdom opportunities that are unique to where you are. Ask yourself, what can I do here that I couldn't do anywhere else? What can you do in your current position that gives you access, that gives you influence or visibility? And if you're not aligned in how you show up, I want you to align yourself so that you are not limited. So, what is it? I want you to think about that, right? What can you do in your current position that you couldn't do anywhere else? Now that you are positioned there, you have access, you have influence, you have visibility. What is it that you can do? And when you figure it out, go ahead and start doing it. Just do a little bit of it this week. So let me leave you with this. You don't need more confidence. You need more alignment. Alignment in how you show up, how you speak, and how you lead. Because when your behavior and identity are in alignment, everything changes and the identity gap closes. Now, let me tell you this, it's not going to happen overnight. But steadily, if you are consistent, you will see that shift. You'll see that change, and it'll be a change that will last. So let's close that identity gap. I want to thank you for listening to In the Arena with Stephanie. This was a short one today, but it's one that you really need to think about and that you really need to work on. If today's episode inspired you, I want you to go ahead and share this with another woman who may need to close her identity gap. Also, if you've been enjoying the first season of this podcast, take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a rating. Your support will help us to reach more women who are on this journey to become ambassadors in their arenas. For more inspiration and motivation, go ahead and grab my new playbook, The Balance Myth: God's Woman in a Male-Dominated Arena. The link is in the show notes. Remember, you're an ambassador, so act like it. Until next time, we'll see you in the arena.